Hi guys, Brian here from Sydney Back Pain Program. So in this video I'm going to look at kind of the last pieces of the puzzle in terms of successfully rehabilitating a chronic back issue and getting yourself safely back into the gym or potentially get you back into kind of your chosen sport safely and effectively. So obviously, you know, probably the most important principle when dealing successfully with back pain long term is the idea of a bank balance. So the bank balance is basically how much work that your back can do before it starts to get kind of a bit edgy and a bit tweaky and twingy and things start to kind of break down or it has a full-on collapse. So obviously our goal when we're going to train, especially in the gym, is we want to train exercises and train in a way that's going to allow us to maximize that bank balance and build it as big as we can with the intention of over-engineering ourselves for what we want to be able to do either day-to-day, training-wise, or with our sport. So, for example, the average person, just for day-to-day stuff, working in an office, you might need sort of $100 in your bank account for sort of a strong enough back that isn't going to sort of flare up and have issues, which is a little bit easier to achieve than say someone who, like a recreational lifter, wants to go into the gym, wants to squat, deadlift, bench press, do all the things they enjoy doing with the heavy lifts. You might need more like $200 in your bank account. So therefore, when we train, we've got to try and give you at least $250. So we've got a bit of a safety buffer for things like stress, fatigue, lack of sleep, being ill, unrelated injuries that might affect how you train, all those sort of things we sort of take into account. On top of that, if you do, a regular sport, which, could be hockey, football, rugby, combat sports like MMA, jiu-jitsu, Muay Thai, whatever it may be, you're probably going to need more like a minimum of 300. So there our goal then is to get you to sort of 350 to give you that extra sort of safety buffer on top. So what we need to do in the gym is we need to make sure that we obviously build that bank balance, but also we're not training in ways that deplete that bank balance. So we should always feel that once we've trained the back, ideally you should feel kind of refreshed, like you've got everything moving, the hips are moving well, the posture feels good, and the back, it feels refreshed for a few days. It doesn't feel like it's kind of fragile and a bit, like about to do a bit too much work on it. That's kind of, if that's happening when you're in the gym, you've either missed something, it's either the wrong exercises or your technique's not quite right for your structure or what we're trying to achieve. So that's what I'm going to look at today is kind of my sort of favourites for kind of easing you back into regular training and just some sort of slightly different approaches to technique, which I feel for myself and also the people that I train seems to be the most successful way to do things and kind of keep yourself out of trouble and say let yourself build that bank balance and keep yourself strong and happy long term. Where I like to start initially is helping trying to kind of build or forge a squat pattern that's going to help give the hips a good stretch, help build some mobility, but also build some control, what we call the brace. The reason why I do this, I think generally most people find it easier to start with the squat, and it tends to give more benefits initially with kind of stretching the hips out, especially the adductors, more so than like a deadlift is. A lot of people when they've got back issues, they think I've got a weak back. They go straight to doing sort of deadlifts. More often than not, actually start programming more errors and more problems than if they sort of worked on the squat first of all. But generally, I find it easier to get most people to squat better before we do the deadlifts rather than going the other way around. So squats, what we're going to do first of all is sort of the starting point for a lot of people, so I don't want to put too much weight on their back initially. We're going to do like what we call a modified offset sit-down squat, just using a tiny little 2 kilo weight. So we're going to use a bench or we can use a box just to give us something to kind of aim for. Or a nice wide stance or a sumo stance, some guys call it. Feet slightly turned out. We're going to have the weight in front of us as a bit of a counterbalance. So what this does is it helps teach us to kind of keep our chest nice and tall. And as a coach, I can see if someone's rounding because their arms are going to start dropping down here. So it gives them a sort of bit of extra incentive to keep the back nice and straight through the thoracic, the upper back. But also learn to use that brace properly. Again, if they cheat, everything's going to kind of collapse in on itself. So we've got nice wide stance, feet out in front. We're going to brace and then take the air in. And what the goal of this, as you can hear in my voice, I'm trying to squeeze the air into my belly to give me as much structure down here as possible. It's the same thing that weightlifters will do when they've got a belt on. They're trying to generate as much pressure around the middle so they've got something stable to keep themselves upright and actually drive the power from the legs through the body to get it moving. So hands out in front, we brace tight. And then from there, my goal is to initiate by sitting back with the hips and then pushing the knees out. My goal is to try and keep my shins as vertical as I can. So that means in terms of going too far forward this way, so I want my knees to creep forward, but also not letting them collapse in this way. So I try and keep my knee stacked pretty much above where my heel is and keep the shin as vertical as I can. So if I do a proper rep from here, so braces on. And again. And with that brace, basically anytime I'm moving, that brace is squeezing as hard as I can. I don't let the air in or out until I get back to the top. So the whole time I come down, a lot of people, they'll sort of either breathe in on the way down and then kind of breathe out as they come back up. That completely ruins the point. The whole point is to have that brace at the top, tight as you can, hold the breath. And not let it out to the top. So while that's all going on, in my head I'm thinking to get the right movement, I start with the hips, I push the hips back, and once I start to feel tight, kind of my hamstrings and adductors, and I sit down, then I'm thinking about driving my knees outwards. So they don't want to collapse in this way. And then stretch it out like that. And you can see my feet are starting to dance a little bit as I find my balance. For most people, it's pretty usual as they try and do this, they're going to try and rip their feet off the floor. Some of that's kind of software, when the brain's trying to learn how to keep a stable base as it does it. The other point is they might actually be hitting tight spots in adductors or hamstrings. And it's just going to take a while for them to kind of stretch out those sort of kinks before they can move their hips in a way that isn't going to disturb their feet too much. Because the ultimate goal on this is to do the right movement, nice stable base, nice straight back, and to develop control over that brace. So progression on from the modified sit-down squat. Obviously we'll start getting some weight on the back, but the same movements. We've still got our makeshift box or bench. We're going to set the bar up at the right height to go for more what I call a low bar position. So rather than being on the traps, I want to be a little bit lower down the back, kind of sat in line once your arms are back with your rear delts. There's kind of like a notch, if you pull your shoulders together, it will kind of sit into. So we're going to come in, get our set up with the bar, make sure it's tight into our back, so it feels like it's part of our back, just a random weight stuck on top. Get our balance, unrack, a couple of little steps back. Same technique as before, so we brace, and once we've run on, carefully back in. So same idea, maybe start with sort of 4 sets of, 5-6 reps or so, gradually build up. For this one probably, because it's pretty hard with the brace and the weight, probably no more than 8 reps for this one. But same idea, try and keep the shins as vertical as possible. Don't go too far forward and then come back. Every time we're in the movement, that brace is as tight as possible. Only breathe in and out at the top of the movement. And if you take extra time between reps or an extra breath, you can do. But as you can tell, when you've got the brace right, it kind of your blood pressure goes up so high that you'll feel out of breath. But again, the more structure we've got here, less work the back's got to do, the more we can stretch out the hips and kind of keep the back strong. But again, it should feel like with the hips stretched out, it should feel kind of nice and refreshed, like we've got more movement in the hips. Okay, so once we've built a half decent box squat, or modified box squat, I tend to think a good standard is this thing of in terms of percentage of body weight. Once you can do sort of body weight for about 6 to 8 reps with good control on the bar, for my sort of standards, I don't think you're then ready to transfer into a sort of regular free weight squat. We're not having to aim towards a box, but I'd still probably stay with the same technique for most guys. I mean, obviously it depends on their hip structure, but I find for a lot of people who've got back pain, generally if I make them try and squat with a closer stance, it kind of disrupts the balance of what's going on with the hips and the pelvis, and it kind of sets the back off again. And that's even without them slightly rounding the back. So I tend to find a wider stance, keep everything stretched out, generally keeps the back feeling better, a bit more robust long term. So once you've got a good standard, you've done body weight for 8 reps on the box squat, then we can sort of take the box away and we can try doing some free squats. Again, low bar position, wide stance. And again, we're trying to keep the same technique. What a lot of people do once you take away the box, things tend to break, they don't go quite as low, or they let the knees travel, way too far forward. But exactly the same thing, which we're trying to just mimic as though the box was there. But now if we want to, we can try and get maybe just a shade more depth, but with exactly the same technique. What we don't want to do is try and get depth with the trade-off of kind of throwing the technique out the window. So same idea as before. Same setup, ready for the low bar. As we come in, find a sweet spot on the back. Leg off. 1, 2, maybe 3 steps back. Wide stance, chest tall, brace on. Well, I generally tend to practice sort of slow, eccentric or lowering movements for most people. So it gives them a chance to kind of learn the right technique, you can get their balance. And up. Again, once you've got, good technique with this, obviously you go heavier with the bar, but then we can start to sort of speed reps up and start to change the tempo. But definitely in the initial stages, especially move to this one, just go slow, let you find your balance. Now you haven't got anything to kind of give you feedback with, and let you kind of, groove a nice smooth technique. Without any sort of jerky bits, and again, keeping the focus off the back, keep all the weight in the hips, let the hips are taking the load for you. So we have our squat technique underway with the modified sit-down squats, box squats, and then get back to a regular sort of sumo stance, low bar position, give the hips a good stretch. So that kind of covers our hips in one type of movement. Now we need to look at kind of the hip hinge movement, how we develop that. So obviously, before we get to this point, I'm assuming you can do a reasonable glute bridge with both legs. Ideally, you've got some control over unilateral glute bridge off the floor. You can do reps with good control actually for the glutes, contract and fire. So the progression on from that is we're going to a standing position, and we're going to go to unilateral, working a single leg at a time. So we need a bit of support with a stick initially to help with balance. But if I'm going to work my right leg, the stick's going to be on the left side for balance, not the same side, so it's opposites. So get the weight on the leg, a slight knee bend. Slight knee bend is going to help with balance and control. Try and keep tall posture. Find a balance point, and then from here, we're just going to lean forward, try and be aware of the glute doing all the work, and we're going to push the other leg through. So it's almost straight, and then we come up. But we only go as far as we can with good control. What we're going to do is, if you go too soon, too far, you're going to kind of twist or buckle, the knees will drop in. The other thing is with the stick, with progression, when you first start, kind of white knuckle, a nice tight grip. So you've got a lot of help coming from it, just to get it. And then once you've kind of got a bit more confidence, you can let the group loosen up a little bit. And then we can just let it slide down as we need to. And then up. Once we've got that for sort of 3 to 4 sets of 6 to 8 reps, we can get rid of the stick. And then just do them free weight. Exactly the same technique, but just take your time, slow control. So a quick look at the technique without the stick, but especially it's exactly the same thing. A lot of it is this setup, is just getting the weight on the leg, so you've got your balance point, getting that knee slightly bent, and then we've got the weight on the leg, and then from there, you can put your hands initially wherever you need to for balance. Exactly the same movement, lean forward, shoot the leg through. You should feel that the glute is absolutely screaming both on the way up and the way down, because it's stabilising that leg for you and doing the bulk of the work. You might feel some tight spots in your hamstrings, calves, maybe even the bottom of your feet when you first start working. But eventually it should just pretty much be just all the glute doing the work all the way through. And once we've got that, if you're a bit more athletically inclined and you want to get into sort of running, or improving sort of sprint times, things like that, we actually start to work on our arm mechanics for running at the same time. So you might start from this sort of position, and then do the same movement slowly and controllably, and then think about your arm pump with your arms and getting your elbows to move. Like that. And then for that we can sort of build up, start with sort of 6 to 8 reps and then build up more to sort of 10 to 12, sort of 3 to 4 sets works quite well. But again, the goal is make the glutes scream. Like when you initially first start, you might have tight spots in your hamstrings and your calves, maybe even the bottom of your feet. Let those bits stretch out, but over time, you should find, on both sides, no matter which leg you do, that glute's in control and it's just pretty much on fire the whole time because it's helping stabilise your knee and it's kind of doing that, the actual hip hinge movement, and that's what we want. We want good control on the glutes, both sides to be as good as each other and get as much range of motion as possible as we can without sort of, buckling the hips one way or collapsing in the other and kind of losing our form. So once we've got decent control over each of our glutes with single legs, the single leg RDLs that we looked at, we've also got good sort of range of motion with them as well, and both glutes feel as strong as each other, then that's when I would look at do the deadlifts. So as a recap, I always start with squats first. At the same time, you can look at the kind of the RDLs with the stick and without the stick, get that up to scratch. Once you've got kind of those both in place, so people know how to brace, know how to use both their legs the same, then I would look at the deadlift. Only because I've found in terms of back rehab, for the stuff that I've worked with, in terms of risk versus reward, obviously squats and deadlifts are very rewarding, but I tend to find for a lot of people, deadlifts are a little bit trickier to learn safely and a bit more risky. So I want to make sure that the squat's good, single leg control is good on the RDL, and then we'll look at the deadlift once we've got those in place. So my favourite is, and again, this is in terms of long-term back rehab, isn't necessarily in terms of you want to be a super strong power lifter or get the most amount of weight up, because there's always trade-offs there with the maximum amount of weight, what's going to be the best technique for your particular mechanics. What I'm looking for is, how can I stretch someone's hips out as much as possible and keep things nicely balanced so that the muscles that were generally tight before don't start to kind of redominate proceedings. So what I look at is it's like a sumo style stance squat, although we can sort of make it a little bit hybrid by kind of playing around with the stance. It doesn't have to be crazy super wide, but maybe more a little bit in close for some people. Maybe just a touch wider, or if not the same as what we're going to do on their sumo squats, maybe some slight modifications. The same idea as with the squats, I want to try and keep the shins as vertical as I can. So I don't want them to tip too far, forward, and I don't want them to sort of buckle in at any point. And again, in terms of weight and load, I'm looking at percentages of body weight. So probably initially you might start with, sets of 6 to 8 with 50% of body weight, and then gradually work your way up to full body weight. So this is kind of what the setup would look like, or how I do it for me in particular. But I generally use this as a rough guide for most of the people that I work with. So we set the feet out, probably about the same as you'd be a squat, sort of 45-degree turn out. From here, and we're going to reach down, I shoot my hips back. I'm going to grab onto the bar, and then I sort of pull the weight of the bar into me to kind of pull myself nice and tight into my hips. Braces on, up through the hips. And what I would do initially for most people is do a second breath at the top and re-brace. Down nice and safe with control. And again. There. So we're looking at tight brace all the way up, all the way down. Smooth control all the way down, so we don't get too many bangs at the bottom, especially on the way down. I don't want it to sort of let go just before it hits the bottom and make a big crashing sound. We're trying to control it as much as possible. Obviously you can tell from a breath, even with a mighty 50 kilos on the bar, blood pressure goes through the roof. Once you've got that brace on properly, you've got that structure, takes a lot of energy and oxygen to get, to keep it going. So obviously start off with 4, maybe 5 sets. Maybe just do 2 or 3 reps initially, get the technique down pat, and then gradually build up to maybe 6 to 8. But then once you've got kind of 6 to 8 of body weight, then you can start going to sort of regular periodization type programs. But again, I always keep that same technique, try and keep the shins vertical, keep it all in the hips. Try not to let the quads do too much of the work initially. Try and really feel it through sort of glutes, hips. Keep that structure here tight. Really think about, especially at the bottom position, really use the weight at the bottom, wedge yourself in and kind of stretch everything out in the hips. And then come up from that strong position. So you shouldn't feel like you're too off balance or like you kind of, hips are too high like this. It's kind of all on the back. It wants to be right in the hips. You have to kind of use the weight of the bar to kind of wedge yourself in to get in nice and deep, to get that right position. Front view on the SUMO deadlifts. So for me, this is where I go. So I'm not like crazy wide, probably about the same width as I do with my SUMO squats. Toes turn out about 45 degrees, so they're not like this, they're not buckled in. 5 degrees, once I'm roughly right, I can sort of get myself down towards the bar and see how I feel. Grab hold of the bar, use the weight of the bar to kind of help wedge me into my hips nice and tight. Oh, I can feel that. Air in. Wedge in. Nice and tight. I use 2 breaths, especially in sort of rehab stages, to make sure people are bracing not just off the floor but on the way down as well. But again, you might need to play around with feet position a little bit. But the most important thing really is get yourself in and then use the weight of that bar to wedge into the hips nice and deep, and then kind of pull from where that sort of tension is off the floor. So we looked at sort of the bigger lifts, squats, hip hinging, deadlifts. Now I'll kind of look at, possible accessory exercises that you might want to drop in. And one of the ones I really, really like are ab wheel rollouts. But it's also one of the exercises that I see most frequently done incorrectly, especially for our goals in terms of lower back rehab. So in terms of lower back rehab, what we want to do is we want to spare the back as much as possible. And we want to teach the core and the brace to help keep our spine in a nice, safe position. We don't want to risk that. So one of the things I hate or misunderstands that I absolutely cannot stand in terms of back rehab is people say, I need to work my core, I need to work my abs. So they do things like crunches and curls and all that sort of nonsense. The trouble is you've got 2 problems there. One is, best case scenario, that's without any disc bulges. You're teaching people to only be strong in that kind of curl position when the back's at its weakest. Are more likely to get a damage, especially to discs and things later on in life. Worst case scenario, if someone's already got disc bulges or herniations, that constant flexion is going to make that worse if the bulges are going posteriorly, which most people generally tend to do. So we want to avoid that, and we don't want to wear out those discs anymore and they're already worn out. So if we're going to do, ab and core work after we've done sort of floor work, like things like Sid-bridges, McGill Curls, bird dogs, the sort of fundamentals, we then need to progress, kind of up the challenge. And one of my favourites is actually the ab wheel. I think it's an awesome exercise. Underrated, I think, in terms of back rehab. But most people can get hold of an ab wheel these days for sort of $20 or so from most sports shops. I think they're great. Do them a couple times a week. I find for me it really helps keep it in check. And for most of my guys, it helps the back again feel refreshed and stable. So what we're going to do here, we're going to get the setup right, which is the key, which most people get completely wrong. So a lot of people, when they set up, they start like this, which is wrong. As soon as these hips here, start to break, especially past the knees, all that weight and that load is on my lower back. So I want to use this as a core exercise. I don't want to use it as a back exercise, which is going to make things worse. So setup position, the correct setup position, keeping the wheel below your chest. Just kind of walk your knees back a little bit, and then just pop your hips forward here. So what I've got here is I've squeezed my glutes on. I've squeezed that brace onto my abs so I can still breathe. That's where we start from. We don't break the hips back even a tiny bit at any point. Keep the hips forward. And then from there, then we can just gradually work in whatever range you've got. 8 to 12 reps, And over time, as you get better at it, you can extend a little bit further out until eventually you can go all the way down and all the way back up. But at no point have we gone like that. What a lot of people do is they get into this position, they go way too far from what they can handle, and then break at the hips to come back. Completely defeats the object of the exercise. Go straight to the back and start to re-aggravate everything. Okay, so remember what we want to do is from here, hips are forward, pat. Just start off small, and as you get the hang of it over a few days, a few times, just gradually work your way out until eventually, keeping everything tight, you can go all the way down with control. In terms of reps, generally I go sort of, start off 8 to 10, gradually be up to sort of 12 to 15 reps. That's going to keep most people out of trouble and get the back nice and strong. So guys, a bit of a wrap up. So obviously those are, no means an exhaustive list. All the things that you can do to get back in the gym, I want to say all the things that I use, but they're some of my sort of cornerstones for getting people out of, the strict rehab floor work, the basic level fundamentals, if you like, or if you're into martial arts, the sort of white belt level stuff. Here we're getting up sort of into the sort of the higher ranks, into stuff that's a bit more useful for training. Obviously there's things you could do with kettlebells. I could do a whole video, or just on different kettlebell stuff that I can use for back rehab, but those were sort of fundamentals, my basics, my pointers for getting back into them, safely, and helping build a back that's strong and robust. And then when you work out, it doesn't feel like it's getting chewed up all the time, and actually starts to feel like it's getting refreshed, and you're building mobility in the hips, and also building a strong posture as well.